Okay, so as we know, we have a guest speaker today. I'm going to introduce real quick. Most people, can you shut that, Jason? So most everybody here is from the class, but those who aren't, this is framed within, East-West philosophy, particularly you guys coming off of Sufism on Wednesday. But some interesting connections after the talk. So we get started. Today we have the guest speaker is talking about Kabbalism, so Jewish mysticism. And Phil Raskin has an interesting background. He has taught at a local synagogue for about 15 years and used to work in creating ritual objects for Jewish practice, for Jewish rituals. So he's got a very interesting insight into Jewish practice. This is the second time on campus. He spoke a couple years ago for one of my classes. I believe it was the East-West course then also. And we were doing views of the self. And he spoke on Jewish sense of the self, which to this day is still the most positive feedback I've gotten from any guest speaker on campus that was through my class. So on that note, if I could get a round of applause, Phil Raskin.
Boy, I hope I can fill those shoes, because it's going to be a tough one. If you guys have questions in the middle, that's fine. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up here. I've taught at Temple Israel in South Minneapolis for 16 years, mostly kids. I was a potter for a long time, and I made Jewish ritual objects. And I've studied Kabbalah probably since I was your age. So, on the screen here, we have kind of one of the most recognized glyphs of Jewish mysticism. We call this the Tree of Life. You'll see that. So I'll kind of describe it a little bit, and then. Again, if you have questions, please chime in. The 10 spheres, let me back up. This is really kind of how Jewish mysticism describes creation. Mysticism in Judaism is a lot about creation and the relationship of the individual to themselves, to their community, and to the divine. The path of creation, as we say, follows this, what we call a lightning flash. So I'll kind of go into the creation piece here a little more. In Kabbalah, God wanted to know God's self. That's sort of the reason for creation. People ask, well, isn't God omnipotent and would know God's self? But in relationship, in a mirror, we understand ourselves much more intimately than we do just with ourselves. If we have some reflection. So to see a reflection of God's self, God said, time to create. In that, the process then was, God existed over everything. And there needed to be a place for creation to exist. So God removed God's self from part of eternity, and there was nothingness. So a vacuum, there was a contraction. After the contraction, the nothingness went on without end. God is infinite, so the void that God created became infinite. And from that infinite nothingness, there came light. And the light is the first manifestation of the creation process. That light condenses into the crown. These are, put this up here in English later so you can see what the spheres are called in English. So it would follow from the crown, and then it kind of makes this, what we call the lightning flash, or the ladder. Sometimes this is referred to as Jacob's ladder. You guys, if you're familiar with the Bible story of Jacob's ladder, where he sees the angels going up and down while he's sleeping in the desert. So Jacob has this vision of this tree of life, and becomes one of the first mystics by understanding this lightning flash. So this process of creation, first there's the contraction of making a place for creation to exist. And then the expansion of the light, it contracts again, it condenses into this, creating this tree of life. And then it expands again into the multiplicity that is existence. These three spheres on the top, this triangle, are considered the supernal. They're not accessible by the human condition. In the Bible, there's three people that are said to have crossed from the lower seven, where we exist, to the supernal. And those three are Moses, Enoch, and Elijah. And we could, so these three were mystics that understood the tree so well that they were able to cross over and retain the integrity of their soul or their identity. And there's stories, especially of Elijah walking among us to this day. So in this process of creation, there are 4 different levels of creation. So if you think about the story in Genesis where God is creating Adam, and there's a verse there, and it's kind of repeated twice, and it said, and God created Adam, and then a little while later it says God formed Adam. Thank you. Perfect. And there's a very specific distinction in the language between creating and forming. And over in Jewish mysticism, this idea of the 4 levels of creation gets repeated. Like sometimes people will refer to it as the root, the trunk, the branch, and the fruit. Sometimes it's referred to as the will, the intellect, the emotion, and the capacity for action. In this beginning where there was nothingness and the light emanates from the nothingness, that's the emanation. And then as it condenses a little bit more, it becomes into creation. And after it's created, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. Then something is formed. And once the form has started to take place, then you're ready for action. So you have to go through these stages. If you think of a thought process, you're going to build a building, or you're going to design a car. You have to kind of emanate the concept, and you say, okay, I want a building. The concept emanates. Well, then you have to start creating I want it to be in Minneapolis. And so you start to create the realm that it's going to be in. And then the form is you start actually making blueprints. And so it started to take form, and so you have some structure to this. But it's still not a building, it's still not a car until it's in action. The building is here, it exists. So, I don't know if you guys can read the English on here. Can you make it out? Kind of. If you want, I'll read the English and the translation of the words. So the crown at the top is called Keter, and the lightning flash is denoted by these arrows that come down, and then the lines between them, there's 22 paths here. And those 22 paths equate with the 22 characters of the Hebrew alphabet. It's really through this Hebrew alphabet that we're able to approach all these things. One of my teachers posed to us one day, he says, how was the world created? What did God do to create the world? Anybody? What was the action? What was the form of composition? So some people would say, well, did God wiggle the nose? Did a hand get waved? Was there? It was, and it says in the Old Testament, it says, and God said, and that's your clue. That says right there how the world was created. God said, let there be, and then these things came to be. And so to say, to speak, to write, is combining these letters. So there's a couple other traditions in Jewish mysticism in Kabbalah. One of them is called the wheel, one of them is called the wall. And if you took these 22 characters and set them in a grid, and you had, if you will, the A and the G, and where they come together, that makes a block in the wall. Or if it's a wheel, and each of those letters is a ring on the wheel, and so when you turn the wheel and the letters line up, that's creating something. You're combining the letters. There's another school of Jewish mysticism that I won't get into too much, but just so you can hear about it, is also called the chariot. Ezekiel's vision in the Old Testament talks about this chariot with wings and the angels in it, and there's 4 heads, and I don't know, I'm sure you can look it up on Google or something. But it describes this phenomenal interaction he has with some celestial object, and he doesn't understand it, and so there's a whole school of mysticism that deals just with the chariot. What I'm showing you here is much more widespread, typically more accessible to most people. Let's see. There's all right, I'll go back to the tree here a little bit, just for a minute. So the other thing I want to really point out is that the 3 pillars on the tree, they're considered pillar of severity, pillar of grace or comfort, and then the center is balance. So there's sometimes this is thought of as a very kind of Taoist, yin-yang sort of thing, that life exists in a balance. And in Jewish mysticism, there's a number of myths about the creation process, that creation was tried a few times before the existence that we have now. And there are leftover shells of those worlds. Those shells, I'm sure you're all familiar with Lucifer. He is considered in Judaism as like the king of the shells, the tester. He's one of the regular angels, but his job is to make sure that this balance continues through existence.
Does that mean things can never get too good?
Can never get too good or can never get too bad. Right. Something like that. Yeah, there's the human condition, as we go through life and we have this multitude of experiences and we gather those experiences inside ourselves, we interact with the world differently as we age and mature because we've had those experiences to teach us something. And so that understanding that we have of the world is a microcosm of what the divine experiences. The divine experiences our lives with us in a There's a great book by Martin Buber called I Am Thou, and kind of what I talked about last time I was here more. But the relationship, you can't really know yourself without it coming through some reflection, as I was saying before, the reflection of experience, the reflection of relationships, the reflection of growing up, making a life, family. So there's a lot of anthropomorphic method in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism. We study the human condition to try and have some illumination of what the divine condition is. God, it says, again, we take it very somewhat literally, we're created in the image of God. So not that God has a hand or a foot, but that there are body parts and there are emotions. There is a capacity for action. There are some schools of mysticism that describe the very hairs on the head and what each hair manifests in creation, if we were but spiritual enough to see that. Okay, let me show you. Any questions on this, guys? No? You're also quiet. All right, I'll show you a couple more. Try and show you a couple more pictures. Can you straighten this one out? This is 1800s painting by an Austrian named Ernest Fuchs, and this is his rendition of Moses at the burning bush, to experience the omnipresence of the divine. Moses is considered one of our great teachers, one of our great mystics. So here he is in the middle of the transcendence of the divine. It permeates all things, but yet all things are still discernible as individual. So that's one of the paradoxes that the Jews see in their mysticism. Here's before I talked a little bit about the wall or the wheel. This is a little different version of the wheel, where you have it's another version of the tree of life, another school of Kabbalists. So on the top you have, and in the Hebrew it's with the word you can't see. Can you pull it down just a little bit so I can see the top of the page? Thanks. The top is Ein, which means nothing, and then Ein Sof, which is nothing without end. And then it starts to condense into the reality. Can we go back to the very first one? And I just I want to. So when he pulls the tree up, so at the very top is like where the divine meets the beginning of creation, of existence. And then at the very bottom of the tree, this is like, they call this is the crown, and this is the kingdom. The kingdom is us. This is the corporeal form that we walk and talk and eat and interact in. And then here is kind of like your subconscious, your autonomic responses to the world. This is Tiferet. This is like the beauty center. Christian Kabbalists, Christians who study Jewish mysticism, call this the center of Jesus, where some people will say this is the heart chakra. And then you get up to here, and this is kind of where, if you were a very advanced mystic, if you were really well-versed and this is where you would start to see the gates, see the gates of heaven, so to speak. But above this, most people can't rise. I want to go. No, I want to go. Oh, here we go. Throw that. This is Ezekiel's vision of. This is a painter's description of Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. These winged beings with 4 heads and wheels turning in 2 directions at once and fire coming from it. Here, put the man on there for a minute. So here's kind of how we look at it in terms of the relationship to the physical self. Sometimes it's looked at as, oh, here's the chakra centers.
So this is the tree of life?
This is the same 10 spheres that we showed on that tree before, but in the, like, as it pertains to the human body.
So what's the high and the low in terms of the human body then?
Well, the crown is above, and then the Malchut is like, the kingdom is the ground we stand on, sort of thing, where we connect with the ground. And then I'll kind of go to this one a little bit. So these are different ways to connect the trees. And what the Kabbalists have done here is they say, no thing is very few things are just as simple as one point on one point on a page or something. They're connected to something. We need multiple parts to put something together to build it. So the trees are connected to other trees, the aspects of a thing. The chair has weight and color and design and function, and so you start to branch off to have all the different aspects of how something is created, how it exists in the corporeal world. Okay, so let's throw this one up here, and then this thing about, so before I kind of talked about the whole car piece, and this is where I want to, there's an 11th circle on here. I keep talking about these 10. And it's something, it's one of those things that's there, but it's not there. To know how to drive is, you can know how to drive and never drive a car in your life. So you can have knowledge of something, but never have actually interacted with the thing you have knowledge about. So this, if you're making a car, and you're driving, so we call this the sphere of knowledge. When I talked before about the 3 individuals who walked with God and were not, it was because of their knowledge of mysticism and their knowledge of how to manipulate it, is they were able to cross into the supernal triangle. It starts to get esoteric at that point. So, trying to think what else I want to get to here.
Can I pause? Is it really possible to know how to drive without actually driving?
You can learn on a simulator. I can tell you how to do it. You may not have the mechanical feedback from the car, and when you actually go to do it, it may be a little jerky, but you can drive a car. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Jewish rituals and how they fit into Jewish mysticism. So the Jewish mystics say, if there's this ritual putting on your prayer shawl, In Judaism, there's a prayer shawl that adult men will wear, and it has these fringes on it. And by doing this, you're not just supplying the ritual for yourself, but it becomes a vehicle to interact with the divine. That the layers of meaning and the words you say when you do this start to intertwine to create a mystical experience. So on the most basic level, Judaism is very much about deed. We do the deed, the ritual, to understand the creed, to understand the religion, the culture. Other religions more are about creed. You believe this, and then it says, do these deeds because this is what you believe in. Whereas Judaism is much more about, we do these things to understand the religion. So, does that make sense? Anybody?
Well, I would say, isn't that what Hinduism says?
That's what I was going to say. It's sounds a lot more like Hinduism.
Yeah, because we spend a lot of time on Hinduism, the same thing. The ritual is done, the way the ritual is, that's the aspect of Brahman, right? That you're experiencing, the act of doing the ritual is the act of experiencing Brahman as experience.
Right. The ritual creates the experience, which then brings you closer to God. You have access to God by doing the rituals. You have access to the understanding of the divine purpose by doing the rituals.
Well, we looked at Confucianism, which is very ritualistic, with no connection to, right, the ritual. All right, why do we do the rituals in Confucianism again?
Because that's a tradition. To do it, it doesn't have any meaning behind it. It's just what you do.
Well, I mean, it does. The ritual in the Confucian sense is a tradition. The ritual reminds us of that tradition. And that tradition is good because it was good in the beginning. So, I mean, it's interesting connections. So I think you get to the same kind of argument with Confucianism without any real connection to a divine, which I just think is interesting.
The rituals in Judaism are specifically there for, even on the most mundane level, to have access to a divine experience. And then by peeling back the layers, Judaism is often, mysticism in particular, is often referred to as the onion, because there's so many layers. You keep peeling back the layers, and each layer there's another meaning. We were talking before we started that this combination of the letters, even as simple as combining two letters together, this idea that God said, and letters were paired and creation started to come into existence. There's this idea in Judaism called, in mysticism called gematria, which is each letter, like a Roman numeral, is a number. So in Hebrew, the A is 1, and the B is 2, and so on. So if a word has a specific numerical value, so if I wrote in Hebrew, Father, Abba, this is 1, and this is 2, and this is 6.
It's in the semester, all the pins died in the semester.
So then you have 6, and 3 is 9. So any other word that would add up to 9 illuminates the meaning of the first word, or vice versa. So people, you may have heard about Bible codes. And it's the process of taking the numerical value of one word, finding another word that has the same numerical value, taking the second word and putting it into the first verse and reading it again. And it'll tell you something deeper about what that verse means, about what God is trying to tell us. So there's all these layers. The intention, the feeling that you have when you do these rituals affects your access to the divine experience as well.
So now here, the language. So we were talking about Sufism on Wednesday. And so I'm just going to kind of jump in. And he says, so this is Cooperman talking about Sufism. He says, more accurately, mysticism within Sufism is considered is concerned with truths that cannot be captured with any literal language. The poetry and metaphor may be enlisted to say what mystics want to say without being able to say what they're saying. And so it seems in the Sufis, you're transcending language. But here it sounds as though there is no transcendence of language, or does that mean?
The language is the transcendence. The language is the bridge to transcendent experience. The language, the letters, the language. Before I said there's the two sentences, I think they're almost in the same verse in Genesis, where it says God formed Adam, or God created Adam, and God formed Adam. So the Jewish mystic understands that there's nothing in the Torah, in the Old Testament, that's it's not repeated by accident. There's a very specific concept that's put forth between creating and forming. And you have to create before you can form. So it's in that language, in God saying, I create you. And there is the Adam, before he is in bodily form, in corporeal form, exists up here, only in the realm of the divine. And God formed Adam, and now here, he's down here in the kingdom, in the world, in the physical existence. So this, the story of the Garden of Eden and the expulsion from Eden is Adam lives up here, and he's expelled, and now he's aware of this body. And so he has now, in the story of going out of Eden, he has this corporeal form, this physical form. And he's like, oh, now I live in a body. So now I have to do these things with this body.
Now, is there any talk, this might be a question you can't answer, this might be different. Is there any talk or relationship between, like, the view of the book of John and Kabbalah? Because it sounds very similar. Because in the book of John, right, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word, right?
I'm not a Christian scholar.
Well, I guess I would ask this to like a couple of scholars in the room. It'd be interesting kind of, is there a link between this sense of, because it sounds very similar, right? That in the beginning was the Logos was with God, but the Logos isn't out there yet, right? The Logos is there before it's there. It's created before it's formed. Isn't that right? Isn't that what the book of John says?
Yes, yeah.
She's our professional character.
So, I guess the thing I would say to that is that Christianity was born out of Judaism. Jesus was, he's thought to have been a Nazarene, a sect of, a Jewish sect in his day who were mystics. And they said, you know, we want to live more closely to what the Old Testament says. And we want to be able to have our community and our laws and our rituals in a very much more specific way than the broadening of experience that's going on in the bigger Jewish community out there. So his group, his identity was tied up in this Jewish mysticism and this pursuit of a divine experience, a closeness with God. So his followers, when in the days of Jesus, would have been well versed in Jewish theology. So I'm sure that influenced their concept of what they were creating. Yes?
Okay, I'm just like wondering, does like mainstream Judaism believe all these things too? Or is it
Great question. Okay. So typically Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is often referred to as, there we go, tradition of hidden knowledge. So it's not really necessarily a mainstream thing. You won't go into a temple or a synagogue and they're going to have something on the pulpit that talks about mysticism. You may hear some reference to it in a sermon occasionally or something, but you won't see it out in the open necessarily. It is traditionally, you were not allowed to study this until you were over 40 and married and had a life and a career, because it was considered destabilizing to explore too deeply into the realm of this path to approach the divine was fraught with intellectual and psychological dangers, that it was easy to lose your mind. Now today we don't ascribe to that so much, but it does have this long tradition of only being handed down from teacher to student in kind of closed circles of study. And there have been different times in history where there has been bigger populations of people studying Jewish mysticism, and then smaller. Again, this expansion and contraction. If there's one piece of Jewish mysticism that I would really want you to go away with, is that a lot of it is about recognizing the expansion and contraction, the waveforms. And if you have, if you think about when you eat food, the peristaltic motion of your esophagus, it expands and contracts, and it pushes the food down into your stomach. So if you think of a sound wave bouncing off the objects and bouncing around in your ears, that's this expansion and contraction. And that's a lot of what mysticism says is crucial to the divine experience. You move closer and you move away, and by moving closer you see it broaden in your horizon, and by backing away you are able to see a bigger picture. You know, if you have your face pressed to the glass too far, you can't see anything but what's right in front of you, and you step back and you get to see kind of a broader view.
So what's the, so back to kind of her question, how would somebody who was maybe exploring Judaism, they wouldn't come across Kabbalism unless they were in it, right? Is that kind of...
So there's been some mainstream popularity of Kabbalah in the last 20, 30 years or something. There's been a number of celebrities who have, oh, you know, now I'm studying this, or I'm part of this. And,
New Age.
Kind of more of a New Age experience or something. It was kind of more, it was typically more reserved for people who were very religiously observant and understood the laws and the obligations of the rituals very intimately. And then they would be kind of handpicked by teachers and say, okay, let's teach you more about the deeper meanings of those rituals. And if you like, you can approach, you know, you can start to approach God more closely.
So we can basically open up the questions and bring it up to others. First of all, I have a bunch. So any questions you guys have before I dive in?
So this isn't something that's stigmatized in Judaism, because I know a lot of religions kind of look down on mysticism, or like mystic sects within there.
No, in my experience, in my lifetime, you just don't see mysticism as kind of part of the day-to-day ritual life of, but it's looked at as, it's not stigmatized. It's looked at as kind of a bedrock or a foundation almost of the religion, because these folks are the folks that are working most intimately with learning or practicing mysticism are the very most observant, religiously, ritually observant people. So, no, it's not stigmatized in the sense that you're saying. Sometimes the religiously observant are stigmatized, but what they do is not. Their ability to follow the rituals and delve deeper into them. Yeah?
You said that Adam, he was from a higher status above when he was cast down, he was sent to earth itself. What would it mean in that case person's soul itself was higher above, and when they're sent down to earth, what does it mean to be a person in that case?
Well, I think you're paraphrasing. You misstated what originally the description you're talking about was Adam's created in God before he's formed. So the creation form distinction, not the earth. That's a different. But being cast, because you're saying being cast. That's not what
I think what you're asking is the soul, if you will, is created. Is the mystics look at it as it's almost like if you had sticky buns and you pulled off a piece and you have this soul. The bigger piece is the divine. So you're individualizing a little piece of that divine, and then when that soul gets born, it gets born into a physical body. So it's not really cast off. It's the process of becoming a physical human being.
But what would be the purpose of the person? The purpose of putting the piece, the sticky bun, into the person? Why not just keep it as one whole?
And that goes back to what I was saying before about God wanting to know God's self.
So understanding is the seek of understanding.
Right. There's one of the stories, the myths, is God wants to know God's self. So God says, I'll make a mirror, and puts up the mirror and turns to look into the mirror. But the mirror cannot contain the reflection of God. The image of God is far too great for the mirror to reflect much back. And the mirror shatters. And the fragments of the mirror is the fragments of creation. It's sort of all one piece, but it's like bits and pieces of it. And in that moment of God looking at the mirror, it captured a minuscule spark of the reflection of the divine. And that's the soul, that's the person. And so then the experience of the alchemists would say that the way to make gold out of the sow's ear is first you have to putrefy it. And in a way that's what the mirror is doing. It's fragmenting further and further into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So I was a potter for a long time, and when you make glazes, you grind them very, very small, the glazes, before you put them on the pot. And when the smaller the pieces are, when they melt together, all the pieces sort of flow into one another because the pieces are small enough to interact with each other. And that's kind of what we are. We're small enough fragments of the divine that we interact together, but it also melts into this experience. And the experience is God is absorbing or experiencing our experiences the same time we are, and learning about God's self, learning about creation, in a way the same as we're learning about creation.
So the piece of the mirror could actually be seen as a shattered mirror, but the mirror itself would be God.
Correct.
But in that case...
reflection of God.
Reflection of God. So everything would be kind of like an illusion because it's a reflection of God. It would be a creation of it. So if you look at a tree, it's a reflection of God.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm like, wait, isn't that Plato?
May I add something? So I had him as a student, so I don't
okay.
have these questions.
Go ahead.
So I think this is a wonderful topic. So from this perspective in Jewish mysticism, think of, just like our speaker is saying, think of God as this Ein Sof. This is something beyond time. This is something beyond place. Think of it as going back to that Hebrew letter, an Ein Sof, an Echad, a Godhead, a concept more than anything. And in the mysticism and Kabbalah, you have the notion that in each of you, in each of us, is a spark of the divine. And so each of those shatters, each of those fragments is the core of us. Like you said, we are not born with the soul. It is almost as if that soul is lent to us. And so you, at that spiritual level, each of you are a reflection of the divine, exactly as you're saying. If you are able to look beyond the anxieties and your own past and the hang-ups in your lives if you achieve that level of insight, and almost no one ever does, according to what we read, when you will look inside, you will see the reflection of that divine light, that reflection of the Godhead. It's a very unifying, peaceful, singular experience, which you've probably been learning in your classes, not unique to Judaism.
Right, Sufism, you were saying, Shane, before about Sufism, and I don't know if you guys talked about Rumi at all, or the poetry related, and how the soul is like a reed separated from the reed bed. So in Islamic mysticism, there's that similar God spark in everybody. So it seems like that's a...
That's right. I think that's right. The Sufism sees it. I think we see it in Hinduism distinctly. I mean, it's just wrought in Hinduism. I think Buddhism sneaks it through the back door with the idea of Dharma nature.
Right. Well, in Zen Buddhism, everyone's got the Buddha spark.
And that's, of course, by the time we get to Zen, we've gone through all the other, But and then and I still think the ones that cause us interest are like Taoism and some of these other ones that challenge this entire premise, right? And also, I just want to get back to the question that you mentioned about is Kabbalism looked down upon in Judaism? Because you're right. One of the problems with Sufism is the Shiites and the Sunnis don't get along, but they both get along in not liking the Sufis. So there is something unique about Judaism mysticism in that it isn't kind of pushed aside, whereas like mysticism in Christianity and Islam in both senses have kind of been pushed to the fringe. But, is that right? I mean, yeah?
We have a difference of opinion.
I have a question here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
You can
so
follow.
in the beginning when you're talking about like God like removing himself from a part of eternity and then like that like made like a void or like a nothingness.
Sure.
So then the light came from the nothingness, not from God?
It comes from God. It does come from God. It comes directly. It's if you create a laser, the laser is the concentration of the photons through a mechanical apparatus to create this beam, this singular beam of light. It's almost like one string of photons. It's not like a spectrum. It's like one point. And so the instead of the mechanical apparatus, it's the divine apparatus that focuses this will to create, and the light beams out of the center of the Godhead.
Okay.
Comes directly from God. It is the condensation of the will of God to create.
So is light the first material thing?
Light is the light. Light is yes, definitely the first thing that exists.
The thing about like God like contracting or like removing himself from was like to like make a space for the light?
It makes a space for existence to spring forth into.
Okay.
It's basically light.
God, the myth is that God existence was completely filled every particle, every waveform, everything and there was no place that was not God. And for there to exist something even in such so slightly separate from God, and that's kind of how the Jewish mystics look at our existence. Again, I go back to this transcendent picture here that God exists in the bigger phase through everything, but yet everything exists within, and yet somehow separate. So there's this thin veil between what exists and what is God. And the mystic says, but for us to look and practice, we can experience this transcendence.
I just can't help but keep hearing we spend a lot of time on Hinduism. One, just because it's such a hard thing to get our head around. But boy, this sounds just, if we just replace this with Hinduism, I think we could be talking about...
Judaism has often been called the Zen of the West, or the Buddha.
Well, but Hinduism is even, that's even more, Buddha has to react to the Hindus, right? And what we talk about in this class is that Hinduism is this amazing religion because it can literally, everything's Brahman. So there's literally nothing that it can't happen. And it sounds like Kabbalism has that same ability to kind of say, well, yeah, everything's just. Right? Everything's God. This is what gets Spinoza in trouble. Spinoza gets excommunicated for saying basically this.
He was Jewish.
Yeah.
And he was a mystic.
And he was excommunicated, which in Judaism, is it easy to get excommunicated in Judaism?
No, it's not done. It's not typically done. It's not.
I think it's one of like, you
common.
can count on two hands how many, you know.
Yeah, it's not typical. So, yeah.
I
Keep
have
going,
a question.
please.
So like, how do you say like evil came into the world in this like?
Good question, and a difficult one. So, in the Jewish mind, there is really no heaven, and there is no hell. There is degrees of separation from the divine. I talked a little bit before about Lucifer as one of the original angels, and as the tester. Trying to think of a good way to. In the Old Testament, it doesn't talk about heaven. There's a very vague reference to the world to come, is the best translation from the Hebrew. There is schools of thought from Jewish teachers that there is some kind of reward in an afterlife, but the reward is sitting at the throne of the divine, or sitting at the chair of the divine. The closer you are, so if you're God, the closer I am to Him, the more eminence, the more grace, the more beauty I experience in an afterlife. And the further away I am from Him, the more discomfort I experience by being further away from the throne of the divine. And so if the discomfort is if I behave in a horrible fashion during my lifetime, the distance is increased. So there isn't really the...
So evil's kind of hard to talk about in Kabbalism.
Yeah, people do evil things, but there isn't really... God didn't go through all this to create something evil, to punish for eternity, to something like that, at least in the Jewish mind. God created the same way a parent creates a child, to love and to interact with and to relish in.
Okay, well, would they say since creation is like this reflection of God, because there's definitely evil in creation, there's been evil things, so would that be a reflection of God too? So is there evil in God?
You have to have, if you look at this, if you look at the way God removed God's self to have a place for creation, that whole place that once was completely filled to its very minutest particle with the existence of God, was it evil for God to remove God's self from that place? So it's there has to be some consumption and putrefaction and sort of disassembly of things for there to be other things. And that's part of the experience, the living experience, part of the way that we gather knowledge and experience, and so in turn we say, so above, so below, so we go through this process of learning, and so God kind of goes through some kind of process of learning. We don't really quite understand what God's process is, but God lives with us as we live with God. Does that make sense?